I guess glorious purpose is a burden after all. Loki, season 2 finale. The season has not been quite as continuously good as the first season. Is a good finish, though. The obvious thing for me as a fan of Doctor Who is it brings to mind a bit of Heaven Sent, which is from Series 9 of Doctor Who. It's a Peter Capaldi episode. It is one of the best episodes of the modern era of Doctor Who. And this brings some similar ideas to the table in terms of having to just go back and do the same thing or try and fix this thing again and again and again and again. But what I kind of like and what saves it from being just derivative of that is that whereas Heaven Sent, it's about doing the same thing until you can overcome it. In this, spoilers, be aware. In this, Loki goes through that, time slipping and adjusting himself, going a little bit further back, adjusting a little bit more until they save the loom. And I love a ton of the little details that are in there too, like all the little bits of advice he gives to Victor Timely to make it clear, like all the different things that have gone wrong, like remember to tighten this, fasten the suit, don't put the thing down, watch the first step so you don't trip. All these things that obviously have gone wrong before. And he does all of it, and it finally accomplishes what he set out to do. And it doesn't work. That's a special kind of frustration. To work for so long to accomplish something. It took so long, so many tries, so much work. But the thing that you tried to do was never going to succeed. It didn't matter how long you spent doing it. It was never going to work. That's a special kind of frustration that most fictional narratives, if they aren't trying to be deeply depressing, don't want to touch because it creates a doom spiral pretty fast if you go there. And it can be incredibly unsatisfying. But this allows for the structure of like, okay, what I was trying to do was never going to work. Despite the fact that I spent centuries working on this. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to spend centuries working on whatever other solutions I can come up with. And then we have the loop of him with Sylvie trying to stop her from killing He Who Remains. And it never works. So he has to go through this whole cycle of something else that it just was never going to work. And He Who Remains having that conversation with him, freezing time and being like, this is just the next step, but it's still all going to have the same end. And then Loki freezing time right back going like, what, you thought this was the first time we had this conversation? And I love it because it's not a complete taking control away from He Who Remains, but it is putting a little crack in things like, yeah, He Who Remains has accounted for a lot, but he's still just a guy. He can't quite be on top of everything 100% of the time all the way through. So I feel like that worked well. And it keeps coming back to Loki's connections with other people. His connection with Mobius, having that conversation, sitting down, going back to the very first time they basically sat down and talked and having a new conversation and having it be effectively a version of the old, if you could travel back in time and kill Hitler as a baby, would you, should you, or could you? And like, that's a very basic time travel scenario, but it was still neat just to see it play out in the form of a conversation between these two people. One of whom very much knows the other of whom doesn't really, but is kind of sensing, not exactly what's going on, but picking up on the feel of it. These are just really, and I love that so much of this is played out through conversations. Because that was a big part of what I liked about the finale of season 1. It was basically a long conversation, not much more than that. And it was riveting. And this, while it is a series of smaller conversations than that season 1 finale, it is still mainly playing out in interactions, in dialogue, between the characters, rather than turning into a massive action set piece, which is what 99% of Marvel stuff ends in, even when it doesn't make sense to end in an action set piece. WandaVision, Moon Knight. But this show has this is the thread I am clinging to, that the MCU is not quite worth giving up on yet. Because I see what is done from people who, at least so far as I can tell, were given the time they needed to do what they wanted to do, and it doesn't feel constructed by committee. This feels constructed by people who wanted to tell a specific story and did not have a ton of higher up notes. Probably had some, let's be honest, but didn't have a ton that they had to abide by, and this never becomes a checklist of stuff to set up elsewhere or action beats to hit. This feels like a story told by people who wanted to tell it, and so little of the MCU has felt like that in a while. I needed this. I really needed this. And it's nice to see He Who Remains again. Victor Timely kind of grew on me a little bit over time. It probably helps that we get him in much more limited doses after his initial introduction. That probably helped a little bit too, to be honest. I would say season-wise, Sylvie is a little underutilized insofar as... so this is one of those things where this isn't really a problem, but it's a bit of a nitpick. So, like, ideally there would have been some more emphasis on her and Loki's connection. Like, some of it is there, but a lot of it is just riding the coattails off of season one. And it's difficult for me to explain the difference between building off of season one and just riding the momentum of season one. Because this doesn't really feel like it builds anything new in their relationship. It just kind of is pushing forward with the same dynamic. And that can be okay, except, like, they're kind of pivotal in this. So, like, I wish a little bit more time had been spent with that. Like, a few more things like the bar scene from an episode ago. That would have been nice. But we did still get the bar scene. So it's not like there's none of what I would like. It just a little bit more would have been nice. I think if there was a character who felt very superfluous, and I feel bad saying this, I think it's B-15. I think this season really didn't know what to do with her. Like, in the early episodes, she was the advocate for the prune timeline. She was the one pushing hardest for, we can't just kill these people. And, like, somebody needed to be that voice. But once we kind of moved past that initial issue and it was all about trying to stop the loom from exploding, they really had almost nothing for her to do, which is a shame, because she's a good presence and she's decent in the team dynamic, but this wasn't as much of a team season as I thought it would have been, given kind of how things were starting to go. At least it isn't by the end. Now, let's talk about Loki's solution to this, because this is what I mean by I said this feels like a story people wanted to tell, because there are some very trite, very obvious, that's about what I expected, ways that this could have panned out, and they are very close to how it did pan out. It's just slight, tiny shifts in how it's done that makes it feel right as opposed to feel generic. Because if they weren't gonna have this go back and, like, if they were never gonna do and let's show how Victor Timely specifically becomes He Who Remains, which they never did, and I'm glad. I kind of called it earlier, like, that would be annoying, and they never did it. The next obvious thing, especially with how this episode starts out, is Loki is going to have to take He Who Remains' place. It's a Dark Souls ending. You defeated the boss who was making everything miserable. You find out he's the one holding the world together. Now you've got to do it or everything falls apart. Like, yeah, that's kind of an obvious solution. But it's more nuanced than that. He does kind of do that, but not really. He doesn't just take over what He Who Remains was and did. He changes it. He makes it something new while still taking on that burden. Because it is a burden. Because the other thing that would have been real trite would have been for him to sacrifice himself in like the and have had his arc be, start of season 1, I want power, I should rule, and then he ends at the end of season 2 being like, other people's lives are more important than mine, I sacrifice myself, I'm gone, and you get to live. That would have been trite. You could argue that in a way he does sacrifice himself because he's giving up the existence he knew, the existence he has loved, in order to not only hold things together, but to hold them together in a new way, a way that is not how He Who Remains constructed it. That isn't how he said it has to be. Because He Who Remains was right insofar as somebody has to hold this whole thing together, but it doesn't have to be done the way he did it. And Loki proves that. And that is in a way a sacrifice, but it's not the traditional, I sacrifice myself in a death way. Because when a character sacrifices himself, that's something you do once. What Loki's doing is something he's going to have to keep doing indefinitely. And oh my gosh, I adore the shot that starts out with the loom as it turns green, as Loki is taking his place and connecting with all these timelines. And we see the loom shape that we've been seeing this whole season, and it turns green, then the camera rotates and pulls out, and it's not a loom, it's Yggdrasil, it's the world tree, it's this icon of Norse mythology, and I freaking loved that so much. Oh, it was a masterful imagery. It like taking this shape that we've been seeing. We've been seeing the loom. We've been seeing models of it, the version of it blind. We've been seeing it. Let's just turn it, pull back, and it's been right in front of you the whole time. God, I love that. I love that so much. And Tom Hiddleston brings so much to the part this time. I mean, he's brought a ton to this part every time, but like he has to communicate a lot. He has to communicate desperation, world weariness, acceptance, cockiness at times. He's doing a lot, and only so much of it is in the dialogue. A lot of it's just in the face. A lot of it is in the physicality. And he does it. He does it all. This was not a perfect season. It had ups, it had downs, it had hiccups, it had bumps. But, wow, do I love this ending. I adore this ending. And I will honestly be okay if this is where Loki's story stops. I'm not going to be so bold as to declare that this is where they will or even should stop it, but I hope they at least consider it. Because they didn't set up a following season at the end of this one, the way they did at the end of season 1, which is good. This feels like full closure, and it leaves Loki in a place where he can just stay. Because he doesn't have to go back for the movies. Him continuing to exist was largely restricted to this. Yes, things that happened in this series have impacted other things, the multiverse, multiple timelines, etc., etc., etc. But he himself, he could just stay there, holding it all together. Oh, I'd be okay with that. I'd be good with it. I kind of hope that this is where they stop with him. Would I be up for seeing these other characters again? Yeah, maybe, but I don't think we need to either. This finale, I needed this. The season as a whole, as I said, it was good. It wasn't as good as the first one overall, but this finale, I love it. Not just for the season, but like As a potential end for Loki's story, I love this. It feels really good to be able to pretty much unabashedly praise something from Marvel. It's been a little while, and some of the stuff has been so rough. This was good. The finale of Loki. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. They all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. Take a relaxed attitude around here so you can come on back next time you need a break. Time to thank some patrons, and this time I'm going to say their names as if I'm greeting them, welcoming them to a party. Robin Moore, Zubin Lafula, Goddess Elida, Turok, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Gozer the Gozerian, Oliver B, Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Phenomenalx the Poodle, Robin Powell, T Love, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Rosalind Bennett. Have fun tonight, and thank you for your support. I don't know why I decided to do that this time, but I don't know. I'm having fun.